This is a short video regarding the use of land cover data in the disaster risk assessment. Before I start with that, I just want to summarize or discuss what disaster risk is, or how do I use that disaster risk in assessments. Disaster risk for me and for the assessments is the hazard that can be a fire, floods, this COVID outbreak, multiply with the vulnerability. Vulnerability can then include the vulnerability of the community, people, but also the environment or services or infrastructure. And then to get to the disaster risk is then to divide all hazard and vulnerability by the capacity to cope with that specific hazard. Capacity can be then from government side, provincial, municipal entities, but also the people on the ground to deal with a disaster. And then you combine that in a map to create your disaster risk profile. First, we're going to discuss the hazard part of disaster risk. The example we're going to use is a flood risk in the Uppington area, the town of Uppington. This dark blue line is the flood line for a regional maximum flood, and we're going to use that as the floodplain. Just in short, data that I normally use for flood risk assessment is a digital terrain model, hydrological data, secondary data from reports, and in this case, land cover that I want to explain or describe. Again, the dark blue line is the regional flood line for the Uppington town area. The different colors, as you know, is different land cover. The dark red here is then the attribute value of 20 of 32. That means cultivated commercial permanent orchids. The purple color, number 33, is then cultivated commercial permanent vines. The yellow parts is residential area that can be inundated in the event of a regional maximum flood. This is from these values from residential formal trees to residential formal bare. I then normally use this information to calculate the possible impact of such a flood, where you can determine the area of residential, the area of agriculture that can be inundated in a flood event, and that you can then calculate further to estimate possible impact. The next one is where we use land cover data in the identification or the calculation of vulnerability. The data that I normally use can be classified into societal, services, environment, and the economy, where societal is the demographics or population information. And here I normally get my data from NASA, interesting data source for disaster management. If you look at the following website, it is then the Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, where you can get that specific data population for square kilometers and maybe smaller for the whole South Africa and the whole world, if you want to use data for that. The other one is the Mesodata. We all know about that data source. Is where you can then look at the spatial distribution of many economic and population variables for South Africa. Okay, the land cover, like I've said, the 2020 land cover is available, and you can download it from the Environmental Geographic Information System page of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. If you look at specifically then the land cover data, residential data, extract the residential data from the land cover data, and then overlay that on the asbestos belt in the Northern Cape. And then you can calculate, for example, the total area of residential function that can be impacted by asbestos in the Northern Cape using the land cover data. The other one where you can use then data from MESO and the census data is to calculate the impact, possible impact on services. The next one is environment, where you look then at land cover data, the CBA data from the Department of Environment. The land cover data, this example, is where I use the fire data from the fire of 2020 near the Herzogsville. The burnt area was captured from the Sentinel satellite images. And here is then the possible impact of that fire near Herzogsville on the environment. For example, this graph shows that 73% of this total area is natural grassland, 14% is shrubs, and then 5% is fallow lands or old fields. A way to calculate the impact on the environment by a specific hazard, in this case, fires. Using land cover data to calculate the possible impact on the economy, using land cover data, this is just one example of where I use industrial land cover or land use that can be affected or impacted by aircraft accidents or air transport events in Kimberley. Also part of the Northern Cape Disaster Management Plan. Calculate the area that can be impacted by a specific hazard. And this impact then relates to economic loss or the possibility of economic loss. This was then for vulnerability. The next example, we try to map capacity to cope. One of the elements of capacity to cope is the availability and location of hospitals. In this example, I use the location of hospitals in Limpopo, where I assign specific status to a hospital. The status of hospital is equal to the number of beds available, the number of medical staff available, the type of training of the medical staff, etc. I then interpolate between the different hospitals using the status of that hospital to create a capacity map. That capacity map can now be included in the disaster risk assessment to calculate the overall disaster risk profile for a specific study area.